we will move to session 1 of Islamabad Security Dialogue. The session 1 focuses on comprehensive national security. I would like to mention that the session is being live streamed with participation from regions as far as USA and Japan. The convener for session is Ambassador Fauzia Sana. Ma'am, kindly join us on the stage. Ambassador Fauzia is the Director, Global and Regional Studies, Institute for Strategic Studies, Research and Analysis, National Defense University, Islamabad. She has served as Pakistan's ambassador to Portugal, Singapore, and Netherlands. Ambassador Fauzia, ma'am, kindly start with the session proceedings.
Thank you, Amna. Assalamu alaikum and good evening. Dr. Moeed Yusuf, Special Assistant to the Prime Minister and Special Security Policy, Major General Asif Ali, Hilali Imtiaz, Military, Director General ISRA, heads of think tanks, distinguished speakers, participants, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I, on behalf of the Institute of Strategic Studies, Research and Analysis, ISRA, at NDU, would like to extend our appreciation, our institution's appreciation to NSD and Dr. Moeed for having thought about this very unique seminar, which is now being, today we are going to start all the discussions in collaboration with other 5 think tanks which are members of the advisory board of the NSD. It is an initiative, I'm sure, that will generate policy ideas and options for Pakistan at a time when momentous developments are taking place in our neighborhood as well as at the international level. A few words about ISRA NDU. ISRA is one of the leading think tanks of Pakistan. Its annual flagship events include the National Security Workshop, with participation from the armed forces, political leaders, academia, and the civil society. Other annual events are the International Workshop on Leadership and Security, International CPAC Workshop, National Media Workshop, and Command and Leadership Program. ISRA's regular journals are widely read and appreciated. Some among them are the ISRA papers, the Margala papers, the NDU Journal, and Journal of Contemporary Studies. The Strategic Thought, another prestigious journal, was launched 2 years ago. All these journals are HEC recognized in X and C categories. ISRA is the only think tank that has a center of excellence in international law in the public sector. We also have a center of excellence on counter violence and extremism. ISRA also has extensive collaboration with multiple think tanks and universities. Session 1, ladies and gentlemen, will deliberate on comprehensive national security amid regional and international dynamics. The concept of security is no longer confined to territorial security, but takes a holistic approach that gives as much priority to human security, economic security, environment security. In fact, it should encompass the well-being of the people and the connection between the people and the state, as the Prime Minister this morning emphasized. May I now request Dr. Moeed Yusuf, Special Assistant to the Prime Minister on National Security and Strategic Policy Planning, to share his thoughts on comprehensive national security as the keynote speaker of this session. You have the floor, sir.
Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, and I think good morning and good evening, depending on where you are. First of all, it's not my role as the speaker, but let me once again take this opportunity to thank the National Security Committee's Advisory Board, the 5 think tanks that are involved with us, CAS, ISSI, ISRAT, NDU, IPRI and IRS for making this possible. There's a lot of conversation about the National Security Division since morning, but frankly, if these 5 institutions weren't doing this with us, we won't be here. So once again, thank you very much. In terms of the topic, let me just begin by saying that this comprehensive security framework that the Prime Minister spoke about this morning, we're speaking about here and will do till tomorrow, is not an invention. There's nothing new here. This has been talked about for years and years, even in Pakistan, both colloquially and in the policy world. The difference being that perhaps it hasn't become part of the institutional and muscle memory as it may have in some other countries. In fact, I would argue, in the spirit of candor, that we've had in Pakistan this guns versus butter debate for way too long that actually pits the 2 pillars of national security, traditional and non-traditional, against each other, which I think is a misnomer to begin with, because actually, at the end of the day, you are priming yourself for a fairly antagonistic debate and talking about this as if there's a substitution, an either-or framework that you apply to national security. That actually cannot happen in any country as important, as large as Pakistan. The one deficiency that I would admit, perhaps, is that we have not had this strategic vision, which is essentially comprehensive security framework in any country, in one place, in one document, signed by everybody in a way that there's consensus, such that the debate is not about one pillar of the national security is right or the other, but the debate is how to achieve comprehensive national security. We've not had a national security policy document in one place in the past 73 years, which is essentially the umbrella that provides that strategic vision and direction to any country. This happens to be the National Security Division's formal task. One of our formal tasks is to actually put this document together. So let me just lay out, in my view at least, what this framework looks like. First of all, I don't need to remind the audience that must be tuning in that comprehensive security is essentially a combination of traditional and non-traditional security. And when you break down this buzzword, I would argue it comprises, first of all, national cohesion. Unless you have national unity and cohesion, there can't be any conversation about security in a country. Second, territorial integrity and sovereignty, which is the traditional security framework, defense, military, and the hard part of security. Third, foreign policy and diplomacy that links up with both the traditional security and non-traditional security in terms of economic security. The non-traditional security framework has economic security, which is essentially, as the Prime Minister also put it this morning, the national resource pie, the size of that pie, the macroeconomic stability and growth. And then human security, which includes everything from food security to climate security to water security. And in today's world, we can't forget health and pandemics. Who would have thought that we would be having a conversation about pandemics as a principal element of national security for the entire world, actually, global security? These elements, if they're brought together, will form your comprehensive security framework. But the question is, How do you move forward on this? Do we have a concrete vision? Have we thought through this? Where are we going as a country? So let me just lay out for you how we are approaching this. Pakistan's comprehensive security has to have economic security at the core. Because without economic security, we don't have the resources to continue building our defense and deterrence strength, which, by the way, I want to point out here as somebody who sits right in the middle of this conversation of traditional and non-traditional security. Everybody here talks about the military and then says, you know, a development budget versus defense budget. We have a grossly under-resourced defense sector. If you look at it in absolute terms, look at the threats the country has, the region we survive in, we have a grossly under-resourced defense sector. And then there is the human welfare angle. So if you have economic security at the core, if you can increase the size of your national resource pie, you have more dollars to spend, only then you can spend more on defense and deterrence, as well as human welfare and the Riyasat-e-Madina sort of vision that the Prime Minister has. So how do you get this economic security at the core? There are three pillars that we've identified and on which the conversations are continuing. All three are linked to Pakistan's location. We very often talked about the geostrategic location, which is absolutely true. But we also need to talk more and more about our geo-economic location. And the pillars for that are number one, connectivity, which again was spoken to this morning by the Prime Minister. Number two, development partnerships. And number three, regional peace. The first two can't be achieved without regional peace. That's just the reality we have to live with. In terms of connectivity, there was much said this morning, but for those of you who didn't tune into that session, we talk about peace in Afghanistan because Central Asia is critical in terms of both energy and connectivity for Pakistan. CPEC is the single best example of north-south connectivity, and inshallah will continue going from strength to strength. And then the Prime Minister spoke about this morning eastward connectivity and the reasons that can't happen till our eastern neighbor creates that enabling environment that may allow forward movement. At this point, forestalled, unfortunately, because of the behavior on the other side. In terms of development partnerships, the word I want to stress on is partnership, not assistance. The reason I say that is, even though Pakistan, of course, will require foreign assistance for the foreseeable future, the conversation has to be about co-investment. The conversation has to be about using Pakistan's economic incentives to come and invest in this country. It has to be about economic outreach and increasing Pakistan's global economic footprint. It can't be about assistance if we really want a sustainable, comprehensive security paradigm. And third, and perhaps most important and the prerequisite, is regional peace. And again, you've heard again and again from Pakistan and Pakistani leaders, both civil and military, talking about peace being the ultimate goal, and we striving for peace, but without compromising on any core national interest. I want to repeat this because there's been a lot of media coverage on this in the last 2 or 3 weeks, and some unfortunate. There is absolutely no question about Pakistan's intent or on its core national security interests. But beyond that, the conversation is about peace if the right enabling environment is created, and that in both Afghanistan and India has to be created by others for us to move forward. Two more things. One, yes, I've said all of this. This sounds good. Yes, it seems like there's been thinking on this idea of economic security and comprehensive security. But frankly, how do we get there in such a constrained environment? And the answer I always provide is that the genius of policy is to find ways to get to your goals in a constrained environment. If you have unlimited resources, there's no conversation to be had. So the national leadership is very much on the same page on this. There is a consensus in terms of moving forward. Sometimes we are very reluctant to see the positive side of things, But I could stand there for the next half an hour and tell you all the policies that have been implemented by this government with consensus, moving the needle towards this comprehensive security framework. So this is work in progress already, and inshallah we'll continue in that direction. Finally, let me just say that at the end of the day, this all boils down to a cultural shift in terms of how we think and how we approach policy. The status quo has not delivered everything we need. So change is inevitable in that. The cultural shift that I have in mind has certain characteristics, and let me just lay those out for you, and then I promise to end. Number one, a whole of government inclusive approach. We must continue to operate as a state and as a nation with all views internalized, and as the state apparatus coordinating as best we can on those policies. And this was the message the Prime Minister gave this morning as well in terms of the advisory portal that we launched. Second, proactive policy making. In a fluid environment where great power competition is returning, the world is in flux in terms of the equilibrium, reactive policies will always end up putting us at a loss, especially if we are the ones who are talking about major change. So that's the second part of this. Third, unapologetic and self-confident. This is a pet peeve of mine. I don't know how many times I've said it virtually in every forum and at every occasion I get. When Pakistan stands for what is right, when we stand on a narrative that is justified, just because the world has painted us in a negative light, very unfortunately and unfairly, is no reason for us to shy away from putting our own point of view to the world again and again. And this, frankly, is one of the reasons this dialogue is happening. We need to have our platforms, and wherever we go, have a conversation which others may not like, but is based on reality and is unapologetic in the way we present it. Fourth, consistency of policy. This is one area I think where we have lacked in the past, if we were to be honest. On major reform issues, major strategic issues that we deal with at NSD, and many of you and those who've tuned in follow us on, policy continuity is a non-negotiable characteristic. If we don't follow through with the reforms, it's reinventing the wheel. And that's something that I think we have to work more on as a state apparatus. And finally, introspective and pragmatic. No country in the world that is looking for change for itself can move forward without looking inward, looking at the past, and learning lessons from that. I find absolutely no reason to shy away from saying this, even as a public official. That's actually a sign of our maturity, our self-confidence, and the fact that we are confident in the direction we are moving in. So these characteristics all are encapsulated in this comprehensive security framework that we've been talking about. The conversation is continuing, and inshallah very soon we'll reach a point where we will have in one place this strategic direction and vision for all to see and for the country to follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mohit, for a very clear enunciation of the direction towards a comprehensive security policy in Pakistan, and hopefully we'll be following through all these ideas. Now I would like to introduce the moderator for session 1, Ambassador Riaz Hussain Khokar, former Foreign Secretary and an outstanding diplomat and my mentor. He's currently a distinguished visiting fellow at ISRA. Ambassador Riaz Khokar, may I ask you to join us at the podium, at the stage? Among the panelists, we have Ambassador Riaz Mohammad Khan, also a former Foreign Secretary, who has led Pakistan-India Composite Dialogue talks and Pakistan-US Strategic Dialogue, and is author of several books. Ambassador Riaz Mohammad Saab, please आइए. Lieutenant General Amir Riaz has served as Corps Commander 10 Corps and President NDU, and he's considered to be a strategist. And I welcome you, Lieutenant Amir Riaz Sahab. General Amir Riaz Sahab, please, Tashreef Lai. We'll be joined with on the Zoom by Ambassador Cameron Mantar from New York. He is currently the president, East-West Institute, and he was the ambassador, US ambassador to Pakistan from 2010 to 2012. I hope the Zoom link is working. Ambassador Coker, may I then hand over the proceedings to you? Thank you, sir.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I thank the National Security Division and NDU for having given me the privilege to moderate this particular session. Ladies and gentlemen, here and all those who are going to be joining us virtually, I warmly welcome you to this first session. Fawzia gave a very brief introduction of the panel. May I introduce them a little more? On my right is, of course, Lieutenant General Amir Riaz. There are actually 3 Riazes here. Outstanding military career. He has had command positions. He has commanded 2 corps, which is actually quite a rare compliment. And he was also the president of the National Defense University. I've had the privilege of working with him, and I must say that he's a remarkably outstanding soldier. I think the nation should be grateful to people like him. On my left is my very dear friend, Riaz Mohammad Khan, who has been, and I say this with great love and affection, has been one of the most outstanding foreign secretaries that we've had. He's served in many places, apart from foreign secretary. He was ambassador to China, to European Union, Belgium, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, etc. But more than that, he's been a brilliant writer. He's written 2 outstanding books, which I would recommend that people should read. One book is about the untying knot about Afghanistan, and the knot, in fact, is getting knottier. So let's see that. The first speaker, and of course, later on, and I suppose at some stage, our very good friend and a very distinguished American diplomat who has served in Pakistan, Ambassador Cameron Mantar. He's already on. Well, good. How wonderful. A great friend of Pakistan, and we miss you a lot, you and your wonderful wife. He's again had a very outstanding diplomatic career. He was also the president of the East-West Institute, a think tank, and he has served in many, many difficult areas, including Syria, Iraq, and of course Pakistan, I wouldn't categorize that as difficult because I think we had a lot of fun when you were here. So we are delighted to have you with us. And our warmest regards to Madam Manta. The first, well, you know, this morning we had the privilege of hearing the Prime Minister who explained his vision of national security very succinctly. He gave some definitions, some directions, and now, only now, we heard the Special Assistant to the Prime Minister, Dr. Moeed Yusuf, expand on it. So it's really, the subject is vast, and let me put it this way, that mature countries that are very serious, very strong and stable and sound, usually have a national security plan, like the United States. I think many other countries have, including our neighbor India also has some kind of a plan. So I think we need to examine this thing from all point of views. You're so right, Dr. Yusuf, that it's no longer a question of how many tanks and how many guns you have. National security is now a huge spectrum, covers all aspects of the nation's activities, and particularly the emphasis being on the welfare and the of the common man, and bringing about a fair and equitable society in the country. So national security is a huge subject. In this context, let me now invite our first speaker, General Riaz, on the question of the subject that he's going to speak on is geostrategic compulsions, challenge in a transforming global and regional environment. As you all know that the world is in a flux, and due to the 4 years of President Trump, in fact, there has been far more, shall we say, chaos in the world, because he's probably the only president who has been very aggressive when it comes to naming what he called enemies or adversaries, etc. So we have a huge subject before us, and I would request General Riaz to go first on the subject that I've identified.
Thank you very much, sir. And I would once again, even at the sake of repetition, I'd like to say, I'd like to congratulate Dr. Moeed, because what we are doing today is not only just connecting all the think tanks and making our policy inclusive. What we are doing here today is also to establish the foundations of a strategic culture which we lacked. And I'm sure if it is followed through and this effort is continued by others to follow, you and all of us, this will give Pakistan the real foundation of having a genuine strategic culture. Thank you very much for that. I've been asked to speak on security challenges in transforming global and regional environment. It's 7 minutes. I'll try and do it in 5, sir. Because you're asking me to be a BBC weatherman and finish this vast subject in just 5 minutes, and I'll try to do that. So the first, I'll just straight go to the point. There is a power shift taking place. Dr. Moeed said that the great power competition is returning. It has returned. And we are living through that time, and this is a very important time that we are passing through. And I hope this power shift from the west to the east does not fall into that Thucydides trap. And the Americans and the Chinese have the grit and the intellectual capacity to sort it out in a much better way. But as of today, it seems to be resulting in very serious and intense competition between US and China. And Pakistan has a strategic relationship with China, which is steadily expanding. Pakistan also has been an important ally of the United States. But this relationship is at the moment perhaps not at the right place. US and India are strategic allies in this so-called check, contain China strategy, and that has also its impact on the region. Pakistan holds an important place on the geopolitical map of the world, which was referred to by the National Security Advisor. In this power shift, we are experiencing the pushes and the pulls of this competition, and it is causing and will continue to cause security challenges for Pakistan. Then there's a very important aspect. I've just picked up few areas of the environment because I can't speak on everything in 5 minutes. It's the changing nature and character of the Indian state. India is rapidly descending into becoming an ultra-Hindu nationalist state. And with US and West conveniently closing their eyes on India's massive human rights violations and her ignorance of, blatant ignorance of the international norms, India is actually becoming a dangerous country within and for the region, if not yet for the world. It has become very aggressive and irrational and has induced deterrence instability and is leading on to strategic instability in South Asia. Afghanistan, it has never been stabilized since the departure of the Soviets from Afghanistan, but the situation presently, there is an opportunity there, and it's a great challenge also. The situation is delicately poised. It can go to the side of peace. It can also descend into another round of civil war. It is for the Afghans and all those who want peace in Afghanistan to make sure that it moves to the side of peace. Pakistan is the most affected country by the situation in Afghanistan and will remain so. Peace has great dividends for everyone in this region. I will not elaborate on that because we all know that it is going to unlock the connectivity that is holding us and Central Asia and even India should the situation change. Iran, again our neighborhood remains under pressure, but Iran retains the reaction, counteraction capability in critical situations, and that we have seen. Iran-Saudi rivalry is again causing stress on Pakistan. This creates a challenge because one is our neighbor and one is our friend. We hope that the nuclear deal with Iran will come through, which will open huge opportunities again for the entire region. Then there's another aspect which is important, and this is important for Pakistan because there are technological advancements that are taking place, particularly in the field of artificial intelligence, blockchain technologies, and the advent of crypto and digital currencies. In my reckoning, it will change everything. It will change the way we do our business, we do our banking, we manage our investment funds, and so on. The list is endless. I cannot actually really see the entire length and breadth of the change that is just waiting to happen. Unless we are prepared for it, there will be unforeseen shocks in our economy. Climate change has been talked about a lot, but climate change is a very serious security challenge for the entire world, but also for Pakistan, because it will cause stress on our food security, it will cause stress on our health, and of course, the economy at large. Pandemic. As we say in the military, when the war is on, we do not count our losses at that point. When the war is over, we sit down and take a fresh count of what has happened. The world is going through that phase right now. And what is going to happen after the pandemic is over, and I hope it is over soon, what is its effect on the major economies and on the rest of the world, it will also affect Pakistan, and we have to start really thinking about it and start to see that what kind of challenges will come about after the pandemic is over and the world and the region takes stock of what has been lost. It is not possible to study the environment, external and the regional, to see the challenges alone if we do not look at our internal environment. At the moment, there is political instability. And this is actually inhibiting our capacity and capability to respond to these challenges and convert these challenges into opportunities. And I dare say that we have an obsolete system of governance. This has to change, this has to modernize, this has to change fast. Otherwise, our ideas will remain ideas and they will not get translated into significant change that we want to bring for the people of Pakistan. I thank you, sir. I hope it will. I'll leave it 5 minutes.
Thank you, General, for a very succinct statement. May I ask you a few questions that arise in my mind? Number one, as you know, the US administration has come up with its own national security guideline recently, and I noticed that unlike the language that was used in the past by President Trump, the national security guidance paper uses words like competition, cooperation, but they have not defined China in the terms of being an enemy. They have talked in terms of. I think there is a certain leeway in the new document, and it's very interesting that the Chinese Parliament has recently met, and they've come up with a very pragmatic approach towards. They said, yes, we are we warmly welcome competition. We are ready for it. And they also emphasize the need for peace in the world so that the global peace is not disturbed. What do you think of this? Do you think, or do you still think that eventually the two major powers would be on some sort of a collision course? Because if they remain on a collision course, then clearly all the countries around the world will have a rather difficult situation on how to navigate those difficult waters.
I have 3 ways to look at it, sir. One is a historic way which is based on the lessons that we have learned from history. Yes, there is competition between the great powers, and most of the times this competition generates friction. But then the second way that I want to think about this competition is that Americans and the Chinese perhaps both have the sagacity to resolve it without affecting themselves and the rest of the world. And the third way I think about it is that the rest of the world should not just sit back and wait for this competition to get into friction mode and create problems for all of us. All of us need to, we all have a voice. All of us need to talk to our American friends and to our Chinese friends and help them out of this competition. Keep this competition healthy, but not descend into something which is dangerous. So it is these are the 3 ways I look at it.
I think in our own region, of course, you have very rightly said, national security is absolutely imperative. We need a direction, we need a guidance, we need a plan, very rightly so. But I think you did mention this thing that, quite frankly, Pakistan is, unfortunately, the political climate in Pakistan is at the moment certainly not very conducive, and that has created a series of other problems. And I'm sure that the Prime Minister himself and his advisors and others who are stakeholders in national security would make an attempt to bring in, the spectrum of political parties to share this thing, because there has to be a national consensus on this particular document, because government alone cannot really draw it up. So I think this is a very valid point. Secondly, there are, in the United States, there is a debate going on, and clearly hostility with China has become a small industry. I mean, it's sort of thriving. But at the same time, there are people who certainly the new administration has appointed people who have great experience of China and great experience of Russia, which is also an assertive power now. So I think, and President Biden's emphasis on involving multilateral organizations, particularly the United Nations, to play a role. I think this is a very, very sound, very wise approach, because for 4 years or so, the United States had treated multilateral organizations with a certain degree of contempt. I would say that, you know, for us, the critical region is South Asia and the Middle East and the Central Asia, and as very rightly put by Dr. Moeed Yusuf, we are at a crossroad, not only geopolitically, but perhaps also the opportunities for exploiting geo-economic sort of opportunities. So what do you think? Do you think, General, that we will be able to see some hope in progress towards geoeconomics? Because without some degree of cooperation in the neighborhood, I think things will become very difficult.
I'm very optimistic, sir. Maybe this is my bent of mind, but the situation so seems we are at the geoeconomic crossroad also, and we offer a lot to the rest of the world. But it certainly depends upon how situation pans out with Iran, what happens in Afghanistan from here on, and I am sure that there are actors and their players and their countries who want peace in Afghanistan. If that so happens, and there is a degree of sanity in the way India is doing its business with us right now, if that happens, I think these opportunities can all be exploited very well by everybody. It will be win-win for everybody. And I say that to my American friends also. It is not that the CPAC is just going through and it will just be beneficial for China and Pakistan. It will be for the region, and there will be great opportunities for the Americans also to come and partake in this, for everybody, for that matter.
Thank you. I now turn to Ambassador Riaz Muhammad Khan, and I would request him to reflect on Pakistan's, reflect on geostrategic compulsions in a troubled neighborhood. Of course, some points have already been covered by the General, but... Yeah.
Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much. I was asked that I should speak just for 5 minutes or so, but with your permission, maybe 6-7 minutes.
Sure.
What I'll do is not to try to look for a framework, because I think Dr. Moeed Yusuf has made an excellent keynote speech in which he has given the general framework, which, as he said, is not an invention, but something which is very familiar to all those who look into security issues these days. And security now is a very wide-ranging issue. Anyway, I'll try to make a few observations of some practical relevance to, in a historical sense, and also to the present situation. First, let me say that relations in our region, they are undergoing shifts, which may harden and which may require adjustments on our part. These are US-China tensions. Containment was mentioned by General Saab. Then there is this, related to that, what is called Indo-Pacific and Quad initiative. Then we have the situation of United States disengaging militarily from Afghanistan. Then the understandings between Israel and GCC countries, which is a new thing. And not the least, the rise of Hindutva-led policies in India under Prime Minister Modi, which have impacted on the plight of Kashmir and Indian Muslims. So these are all very relevant to us. But I'll make a few other observations. One is there is this, these days, a lot of talk about geoeconomics and geopolitics. To my mind, geopolitics is integral to the location and external environment of a country, whereas geoeconomics essentially means leveraging your situation for your economic development. Now, if we look at the past, there have been opportunities vis-a-vis, for example, the relationship with the United States, the earlier containment policies of the Cold War, we had opportunities. Then we had during the Afghan the intervention by the Soviet Union at that time. And thirdly, the so-called war on terror. As I can see, broadly speaking, we took advantage of these opportunities of sort of upward trend in our relationship with the United States for military enhancement, military defense enhancement, not for expansion of our economic relationship or broaden our relationship with the United States. So, in comparison, if you look at China, once it decided to open up to the West, the first priority it had was economic engagement with the West and broadening the relationship, education, etc., which we did not. Secondly, thirdly, I would say that while security is a compulsion in a neighborhood like ours, so is economy. And in an ultimate sense, economy sustains security, especially in a multi-ethnic, pluralistic state. It is a given. We also pursued policies which had nothing to do with security, but which slowed down our growth or negatively impacted on our growth. For example, Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's nationalization stifled our industries. It had nothing to do with security. President Ziaul Haq's policy of Islamization and Afghan jihad had the same impact. It changed our culture. And today our education is failing to produce good engineers and good scientists. Now these are practical realities. So yeah, and during those days, the 1980s, under President Zia, we were so engrossed with the Afghan jihad that we completely missed out on the opportunities created by globalization, which were taken advantage first and foremost by China and then Southeast Asia and other countries. I remember that following the 1998 tests, there was a brief debate whether nuclear deterrence could enable us to divert resources for economic development. There are also, as we know, less costly alternatives to bolster defensive capability, not offensive capability, but defensive capability. The argument was settled on that in order to keep the threshold of nuclear deterrence high, we needed high conventional preparedness. Next observation I would say is that taking advantage of opportunities requires ability to identify them and capacity to grasp them. Pakistan needs the right economic policies to attract investments and industries wanting to relocate themselves. Then we have to basically attend to the security situation in our own country. There has been these extremist violence, and our army has done a great job in containing it, but the challenge still remains. While the north-south corridors are blocked by the Afghan conflict and tensions with India, CPEC needs to be energized with bold policies. Our schemes for special economic zones require one-window operations as practiced elsewhere, but somehow in Pakistan we have not been able to do that. Mega projects such as TAPI, rail and road links, we talk about it with Central Asia, they have to wait for peace in Afghanistan. Without that, it will not be possible. Next, I will say that we need to proceed with a certain confidence. Our nuclear deterrence is central to our security, to ensure our defense. Strong strategic relations with China are vital. Also because China is the largest source of surplus capital and of advanced technology. These relations must continue to be reinforced. We have shown an abiding interest in good relations with the United States, but the US must appreciate that these cannot be at the cost of our relations with third countries. Most Asian countries will resist making that kind of a choice. Afghanistan, the 29 February agreement of last year, and Secretary Blinken's recent letter offer promising elements which must not be lost in blame game or mistrust. Understanding for a transitional phase or government, and agreement for ceasefire or reduction of violence are the key. Pakistan should exert itself as much as it can with the conviction that peaceful and stable Afghanistan alone serves its interest. For that purpose, Pakistan should extend cooperation with all parties in a frank manner. Now, India. Despite the recent ceasefire along the LOC, the prospects of improved Pakistan-India relations remain bleak. India has pushed the relations in a blind alley by removing the heart of the well-established agenda for bilateral dialogue, namely Kashmir, prescribed at Shimla and reaffirmed at Lahore and in many bilateral declarations. India believes that Pakistan will willy-nilly acquiesce in India's annexation of IOK as union territory. There is evidence of Indian plans to alter the demographics and identity of the Kashmir Valley. This is a fraught situation and should be a matter of deep concern for all those interested in regional peace. Pakistan has to also watch, as I said, Indo-Pacific and Quad initiatives, because India is inclined to flex its muscle for regional harmony. Pakistan has interests in the region to protect, notwithstanding that Pakistan is no exception to the dictum that no nuclear power has ever accepted the hegemony of another power. Finally, I would say that geo-economic options require streamlining our policies to seize existing opportunities for economic development. We also cannot ignore unconventional challenges of climate change, population, food security, and water management. internal political harmony, and countering violent extremism with firm hand and clear conviction are equally important imperatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Riaz, for your very comprehensive remarks. I just want to ask you, and in perhaps in maybe 2-3 sentences,
Yeah.
tell us what you think, because of your vast experience with Afghanistan. You were at Geneva and you have written these 2 books, plus you've been watching Afghanistan very closely. Do you really see that peace is about to break out in Afghanistan? And similarly, you know, our main theme of this whole thing is peace and development are indivisible. They are 2 sides of the same coin. So, do you really think that, I mean, you know, we welcome the LOC agreement between India and Pakistan. But the question on everybody's mind is what next? And what next is really the big issue. I don't personally see India moving in this direction until you very rightly said, accept certain fait accompli situations that they have created. So, briefly, if you can comment on.
Look, you have asked 2 questions, and you want me to answer it in 2 sentences. That may not be possible. Afghanistan. We have witnessed many false dawns on Afghanistan. One hopes that this will not turn out to be that way. The problem is that Afghanistan is fragmented along many lines, ethnic, ideological, political, etc. So basically, so far, there is not a strong and powerful coalition of the Afghans themselves. It has yet to emerge, which can move towards peace and which can counter the forces which are against peace. So, and one other problem that we have as Pakistan, and just not we, but I think the Soviet Union also faced and United States has faced, our policies fell in the divide, ethnic divide in Afghanistan. And we are still suffering from that. So I basically have been an advocate that we should hold back a little bit and we should cooperate on the basis of what is possible and what we are asked to do. Otherwise, we should we should not be eager to be participating in these efforts. We have a role, a cutout role because of geography and demographics, etc., but we should not be keen to play that role, because once you do that, then one party or the other, they have their own suspicions aroused. Now on India, there can be various options. You have mentioned about the LOC. I have already commented on that. I personally don't see that the Indians are prepared to reverse those policies. Unless there is a dramatic, violent movement inside Kashmir, which leads to huge sacrifices on the part of the Kashmiris, and or there is some kind of a tension between Pakistan and India, which verges on escalation to war, then perhaps the international community might intervene, and there would be a question mark as to what would be the nature and character of intervention of the international community. The other possibility is that we try the international to involve the international community to make the life of the Kashmiris much easier. There was a much better opportunity in the past when there was Manmohan Singh. But now one doesn't see, but this is something the international community may be prepared to make a pitch for, but here they would assume that Pakistan ipso facto is basically reconciling or acquiescing in what has happened.
Thank you. May I now invite our very good friend, Ambassador to give us his views as a friend of Pakistan on Pakistan's security imperatives, a view from abroad. Ambassador Manta, really we look forward to your advice and we look forward to suggestions that you can make on how Pakistan and the United States can maintain a working relationship of friendship. You know, we've had difficult times. You've been in the middle of it a number of occasions. You have broad experience, but this is what we would welcome from you, how you see the situation in South Asia and how you see American foreign policy evolving in South Asia.
Well, thank you once again, and it's quite an honor to be on this panel with friends. And I'm impressed by the wisdom that has come out so far, the broad thoughts of Moeed Yusuf and of General Riaz, Ambassador Riaz, that you have really defined the issues, I think, in a very coherent and straightforward way. Rather than try to think strategically myself, what I'd like to give you is a couple of observations from the American point of view, and I add, I am no longer with the US government. Indeed, I am no longer with the East-West Institute. I am an independent voice, but as you say, a friend of Pakistan. And I want to give you some observations about what has happened and happening with American policy that I think can help to an extent in your definitions or your planning for what's possible ahead. And my brief overall mention here, which may seem enigmatic, is Pakistan has lost a great deal of importance in the minds of the leadership in Washington. What that means is that for 70 years, Pakistan has been seen by its location, and it's important to think of location, as just a geostrategic imperative. That question about location has changed. So let me make 3 points here. First is a point that you've mentioned. There is a focus now on the Indo-Pacific. This is different than making a focus on containing China. I believe there are voices in the Biden administration who are very experienced with China, people like Tony Blinken, people like Bill Burns at the CIA, Lloyd Austin. These people are not trying to say that they will try to stop the Chinese at every corner. They want to figure out where they can cooperate, where they can, but they also feel that they want to resist Chinese, what they see in their mind as malign Chinese behavior, where they must. So the Indo-Pacific has been defined then through organizations like the Quad as the organizing principle for the focus of American policy. Now, what does that mean, this first point about the Indo-Pacific? It means that Pakistan has been marginalized. The Indo-Pacific goes from Wagah to Wellington. That is to say, what has been at the center of American policy for many years, that is to say the Middle East, and this is my second point, the Americans are not looking at the Middle East. We can argue whether this is wise or not, but there is a sense of getting out of the so-called forever wars. This is an impulse towards getting out of Afghanistan. And this goes across political boundaries in America. There is a war weariness, a desire to get out of Afghanistan, and perhaps even in an irresponsible way. And I say this as a private citizen. There's a danger of America being irresponsible in getting out of Afghanistan. But it's not just Afghanistan. America is not paying the kind of attention to Iraq that it did. America is not doing in the reconstruction of Syria what it might. America basically will work on the JCPOA, and America will work on transformation of energy to a post-oil world. And that will change the way it looks at the Middle East. But what that means is that Pakistan, which was an integral part of these issues, Pakistan is on the far side now of the line of vision of the people in America who are looking at the Indo-Pacific. So the first point, Indo-Pacific means Afghanistan is peripheral rather than central. Exit from the Middle East means Afghanistan is part of a region that the Americans are staying away from, not looking to, with the exceptions of JCPOA and the ongoing commitment, as always, to Israel. So what does this mean? To me, you could say, oh my God, the Americans are basically taking 70 years of working with Pakistan in various ways and just saying, forget it. Well, what I would argue is Americans are going to look differently at Pakistan. This is an advantage, I think. Pakistan has an opportunity to reinvent itself. You don't see in the United States articles about terrorism in Pakistan anymore. You don't read about explosions in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. You read now and then about some residue issue that comes up. But basically, Pakistan has, and I have told this to Mr. Moeed Yusuf, and I hope also to you, Pakistan has a chance to redefine itself, to reinvent itself in the eyes of Americans. Now, obviously, you don't want to do this for the Americans, you want to do it for yourself. But I hear from your own discussions that this reinvention is important. And that's my third point, after focusing on Indo-Pacific and exit from the Middle East. The third point I want to make is your point about geoeconomics. Geoeconomics is not just a question of addressing pandemics, not just a question of addressing climate change, not just a question of trying to figure out how to build infrastructure. All these things are crucial, they're important, and very, very critical, not only for Pakistan, but for the world. Basically, I think both the general and the ambassador have alluded to this. Pakistan has missed many chances to join the kind of new economy that we see in the modern world. The tech-based economy, the services-based economy, the economy based on investment in your universities, the economy that is necessary for political reform so that the people who are running your parliament are not necessarily people who have just agricultural and textile interests and are infused in the lower end value-added industries, but to give a voice to the people in Karachi and Lahore who are tomorrow's leaders in technology, tomorrow's leaders in the new fields like artificial intelligence that will fundamentally change the way that Pakistan works. And this is where Pakistan's centrality and strategic importance, certainly for the United States, will grow if Pakistan becomes a modernized economy. Not because of where it is, but because of what it is. If Pakistan, in my opinion, can make this transformation that I think the Prime Minister, Moeed, and all of you have talked about, this transformation away from an economy that has not taken advantage of worldwide trends, if it can, then the question of whether you are physically in or out of the focus of America matters less. The question of whether or not your army faces another army, the traditional political and strategic questions become part of a broader geoeconomic question. So what I'm hoping to see is a time where Pakistan is not under the microscope because Americans are wondering about what happens in Afghanistan. There's going to be less attention to Afghanistan. That Americans are not going to be looking at Pakistan in the way that they looked at the time of the Baghdad Pact, or that they looked at the other times of resisting the Soviet Union. I believe Americans can, if Pakistanis show initiative, look to Pakistanis as a road towards understanding China better. I think Americans can look to Pakistanis, if diplomacy is adept, to open doors with Iran, to build like the other Arab states with Israel, to try to build in high technology. In other words, you have an opportunity to reinvent yourself because American focus is shifting away. And this is not necessarily a bad thing. It allows you to create, I think, a Pakistan that has all of the qualities that Moeed Yusuf was talking about. The cohesion and especially the confidence that I think America wants to see in an ally in this region. So that's my message. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for a very, very fine presentation and good sound advice. And we really look forward to a constructive, forward-looking business-like relationship with the United States. I have just one question, and of course, I don't expect you to answer it in very long terms, but there are people in the United States like John Meschmeyer who says that if China-US relations get out of hand and there's confrontation and conflict, then the United States is a superpower and a mean superpower, this is what he said, can force countries in the region to make a choice between either with us or against us. So very briefly, if you can just reflect very quickly on it.
Yes, and believe me, let me emphasize this is a very personal assessment, not anything official. But I think the famous line that the American government gave to Pakistan, to General Musharraf, after the 9/11 attacks, this with you or against you kind of approach, I don't think that's likely to happen again.
Good, that's very, shall we say, satisfying.
The point here is, though, that it also means that America may not be there to engage on issues, for example, like Kashmir or Central Asia, when you want them. So there's a downside and an upside.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to open the floor. We have we've got exactly 15 minutes. If there are any questions. First of all, I'd like to, should I? You want me to? But you know, these are very, sorry, I think they are very long questions, if you don't mind. Question number one, while there is no reason to understate the import of non-traditional security, it must be stressed that traditional security is still very much a threat. With limited sources, how can Pakistan balance the two strands of security going forward? Who would like to, General Saab, would you like to address this question?
I think this was addressed very well
but of course.
by the National Security Advisor that it is very simple. If you do not have the economic resources, your defense without even a fight, it doesn't require somebody to come and take it on, it will gradually start to erode. So, and if your defense is so weak that people can browbeat you because there is a power dynamic in this region, so your economy will not be able to take off. So there has to be a balance, but at the core of it is the economic progress, economic development. If that takes place and the society as a whole is growing, your defense capability will grow alongside.
There's an interesting question.
But if you allow me to say more. But this is easier said than done. Everybody and anybody can say this, what I said. It requires a comprehensive policy which addresses this issue of, because most of the discussion that we had was based on connectivity and making ourselves available to people to trade in and trade out of Pakistan. Pakistan has a resident capability, economic capability. We have land, we have people, we have resources. We have to optimize our own capability first. I think the ambassador was also alluding to this, Ambassador Munter, that we need to have this capability homegrown. We have this capability in terms of manpower, in terms of land, in terms of resources, but we have not been able to put it together in a manner that this can be galvanized into an economic development stream. And that problem lies with, as I said, obsolete governance. We cannot develop because of this. So this is not the debate. Defense and economy, they go side by side. Economy is the key pillar. If it is not there, if you allow me to use some very basic argument, they say that there are 5 pillars of Islam, 5 basic pillars of our faith. Somebody said the 5 pillars cannot stand. I'm sorry to say this, but this is a fact. Roti is the 6th pillar. If you don't have it, everything evaporates. So this is fundamental.
Thank you. There's one interesting question by gentleman Burhan. With growing economic disparity between Pakistan and India and modern Indian defense acquisitions, how can we ensure strategic stability in the region?
Okay.
Like to?
Yeah. I think this question and the earlier question, they are linked. Basically, we have to do a lot of introspection as to how best we can enhance our defensive capability and at the same time release or divert resources for economic development. Now here there are examples of many other countries. It's a question of offense and defense. Do you need more planes or do you want to have more anti-aircraft equipment, missiles? Do you want to have tanks or do you want to have more anti-tank missiles equipment? So that is the kind of choices which are made. For example, if you look at China, although their economy was growing very fast, during the 1980s and 1990s, they did not go beyond about 30, 40 ICBMs. Now, of course, they are modernizing their forces. So we have to basically look at these various possibilities. And the one very important factor that we have here is that the nuclear deterrence guarantees our defense. It doesn't give us leverage for offense. So these are the things that need to be basically thought about.
Well, we don't have much time, but maybe I'd request the audience, if there are any questions from here, if you would like to. Anybody?
My point is that no one has talked about education and no one has talked about health. Since morning, no one has talked about infrastructure. I think these are also very important as far as building your country's both defense as well as your other economic capabilities. So I think for economics, it's extremely important that you give maximum importance to education. So I don't know how you are going to integrate that. I would really like a greater emphasis on that, because without it, we would remain a country which is unable to compete and unable to really be in the race for technology.
General, let me just answer that question. I think there is great clarity in the government. No, I'm just saying there's clarity in the government that social economic development, which actually means focus on health, focus on education. And education, I think the emphasis has to shift a little bit. There has to be much greater emphasis on science and technology. Unfortunately, and Ambassador Manta might make a comment here, you know, the American Charge d'Affaires was telling us about the hundreds and thousands of Fulbright scholarships that the United States has been offering us. But why don't you give us scholarships for science and technology? Why only for social sciences? Because social sciences are something that we can catch on here. But would you like to comment on it, Ambassador?
I can only say briefly that we have never had a shortage of students coming to the United States from Pakistan in the so-called STEM, science and technology area. The way this has worked in the past is we haven't needed to encourage it. It's happened anyway. If you go to the physicians in the United States, if you go to see the engineers, they are overrepresented by talented Pakistanis who have come and studied with us. So that's at least why the government has not done this. simply because there are already so many Pakistanis who study in science and technology in the United States that they don't feel they need to encourage it anymore.
Riaz, I'll add one sentence to it.
Sorry.
I'll add one sentence. I'll add this, that we should be sending people to learn science and technology abroad. Chinese, for example, have been sending hundreds of thousands to United States, to Europe, elsewhere, to study just two things, science and technology and English. Similarly, we had chances earlier, but today, if our people do not get opportunity to study sciences in United States, there are opportunities available in China. And I know for a fact from our American friends that Tsinghua University is as good today as MIT.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think I have 5 minutes to conclude this. Oh, sorry, I didn't see you. I apologize.
It's okay. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Asawir Tawheed, and I'm a student of the School of Politics and International Relations at Quaid-e-Azam University. My question is, how long can we rely on our own nuclear capabilities as defense upholding with rapid Indian nuclear modernization? Do we not need to create a space for an offensive capability as well?
That question has been...
What is it? I couldn't hear.
Yeah. I'm sorry, it's not clear what you meant.
It was mentioned that our nuclear capability is more on the defensive side as opposed to it being on the offensive side. So how long can we rely on mere defense? Do we not need to create a space for an offensive capability as well?
Maybe
I
Thank
see.
you.
Okay.
In the nuclear world, there is nothing known as...
Okay.
In the nuclear world, there is nothing known as defense or offense, it is deterrence. And it is a function of, the fundamental function of nuclear capability is to create a sense of deterrence. And deterrence works between rational actors, and it resides in the mind, actually. So, yes, there are other aspects of nuclear development and capabilities. It's not in terms of defensive or offensive. So, we leave it at that. I think our deterrence vis-a-vis our requirements of deterrence is well placed.
I'll make one comment. Can I? Yeah, this has something to do with the theology of nuclear deterrence. And I'll suggest that you read an excellent book by Bill Perry. He was Secretary of Defense under, I think, Mr. Clinton. So this gives all the aspects of the nature of nuclear weapons. What do they mean? And that essentially concludes that they are a weapon of defense. They basically protects a country from being aggressed against, rather than these being a weapon of use to be deployed in a war situation against enemy. So this is a complex subject. There is a whole lot of literature on this, and I'll suggest that book, Button. Its name is Button. You read that.
Ambassador Mantra, can I ask you one more question?
Certainly.
Will the United States play some kind of positive, constructive role in bringing about peace between India and Pakistan? Because peace is the foundation of the entire process, peace and development. And if there's no peace between India and Pakistan, I'm sorry, South Asia doesn't really have much of a future. Would you like to comment on that?
I certainly would like to see the good offices of the United States applied, especially on the question of Kashmir. And yet, this has not been something the Americans have wanted to do for decades. Increasingly, I am sorry to say that the point that I made about the line being drawn on Indo-Pacific thinking on India's western border makes this even less likely. So in plain English, I would not be terribly optimistic that the Americans will engage in India-Pakistan relations?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the end of our. Would you like to?
Yes. Thank you, Ambassador Riaz Khokhar, session convener, and the speakers for a fruitful discussion. Now, I would request the keynote speaker and the session convener to kindly come on the stage for a group photograph.
Oh.
Yes.
For what? What is he coming for? Sorry.
Kindly, all the dignitaries are requested to wear the mask. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Now I request everybody to join us for a cup of tea organized outside the auditorium. The second session will start at 6 p.m. Pakistan Standard Time sharp. Thank you.
make sure any announcement by the attention, please. Just to bring to your notice that these sessions, especially those who are standing outside, the students and other colleagues, please stay outside the hall. This session that is going to happen take place now, and all the subsequent sessions are strictly for the organizers and our associates who are organizing this event. All the other individuals, including the students, please stay outside. We have the chairs laid out for you over there, and you can observe and watch the program from the outside. So please don't enter the hall. Thank you.
I just need to make a small announcement. We are about to begin with the session 2. The session is primarily a virtual session. So I would request the media people and the think tank people to kindly sit outside because they can see the session proceedings, and only the speakers, discussants, and the special guests, they are allowed to sit. We are about to begin. This session is strictly for the think tank, for the media advisory board and the speakers. And the rest are requested to please sit outside. ये जो बैक रोज पे बैठे हुए हैं, काइंडली आप लोग सोशल डिस्टेंसिंग मेंटेन करें, 2-2 सीट्स छोड़ के बैठें. आप लोगों से रिक्वेस्ट है ये, प्लीज़. Now we'll start off with the session 2 of the Islamabad Security Dialogue. The session 2 is on economic security at the core. The session will discuss economic security and globalization, sustainable development partnerships in environment and energy, and the economic outreach through economic diplomacy. The session convener is Air Chief Marshal Kaleem Sadat. Sir, kindly join us on the stage. Thank you, sir. Air Chief Marshal Sadat is President, Center for Aerospace and Security Studies and former Chief of Air Staff, Pakistan Air Force. Air Chief Marshal Sadat is also the patron-in-chief of Thinkers Forum, Pakistan. I hand over the session proceedings to Air Chief Marshal Sadat. Over to you, sir.
The topic of this session is Economic Security at the Core, a title which reflects the centrality of economic security at the government's vision for an adaptive and all-encompassing security paradigm. Ladies and gentlemen, it is important for us all to acknowledge that a country's economic security must remain a foremost priority within its overall security calculus, because a well-functioning, dynamic, and robust economy helps to bolster the other pillars of national security. The government has keenly expressed such thinking, and the Center for Aerospace and Security Studies has remained highly attuned to the importance of economic security since its inception in 2019. Ladies and gentlemen, CAS is an independent think tank that specializes in research on key issues pertaining to aerospace, security, and economics. Despite its nascent development, I'm proud to say that CAS has productively and proactively engaged with many facets of the wider security domain, including the nexus of economy and security. It has made a clear distinction between national defense and national security, and work toward evolving policy suggestions toward promoting the latter. Another point that needs to be recalled is what Clausewitz said, that war is a continuation of politics with or by other means. Economics is an important part of politics, as has been demonstrated by the actions of international financial institutions as well as Financial Action Task Force. To get out of their clutches, we need economic sovereignty, and that can only be achieved if economics is the focus of all policymaking. I believe that today's session will help to enrich our common understanding of economic security at the core through the rich insights of speakers and participants today. For this session's keynote address, I have the pleasure of inviting His Excellency, Mr. Abdul Razak Dawood, Advisor to the Prime Minister on Commerce, Textile, Industry, Production, and Investment. Mr. Dawood is a noted philanthropist, businessman, and public figure who, through his many efforts, has made notable contributions to Pakistan's economy over the years. Without further ado, I take this opportunity to invite you for your keynote address, sir. Please come on the stage. Would you like to speak from here?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Honorable Chair, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. It is indeed an honor for me to be here at the Islamabad Security Dialogue to speak about the all-important subject of economic security. The concept of economic security has recently started to getting the attention it deserves here. It is a broad concept, and I will confine myself to a few elements of it, otherwise I'll be talking much longer. Ensuring national security is the primary responsibility of the state, and it is closely related to economic security. A nation's power, influence, and its economic security are deeply intertwined. Economy as the core of its national power, and all other elements revolve around it. I've always believed that in order to strengthen national security, a nation needs economic security. In other words, a strong economy will enhance the country's power, influence, and importance, and hence, through those strengths, strengthen the national security. This has been well brought out by Dr. Paul Kennedy in The Rise and Fall of Great Powers, wherein he shows that the British financial strength, its economic strength, was the single most decisive power in achieving its imperial objectives during the 18th and 19th century. History has taught us that economic backwardness, failure to create jobs, thus leads to social conflict, political instability, and therefore weakens the national security. Economic security, thus, is the basis of national security, and loss of economic security leads ultimately to loss of erosion of national and national sovereignty at its core. We have recently gone through that. I know the pains this government went through right at the start when we had to go to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Abu Dhabi, and put your hand out. Where is your national security? Where is your strength? Where is your importance? Where is your influence when you have to ask to be saved? It was a pretty embarrassing situation, and I know the pain the Prime Minister also went through. Nothing demonstrates this better than the disintegration of the Soviet Union. We saw it before our own eyes. It's a classical case of ignoring economic security, culminating in the breakup of the Soviet Union and the loss of national power and security. The meaning of security has evolved and emphasized that it is not the military dimension alone. Rather, it has become a holistic concept. And within that concept, it's the economic part that really holds the key. Ladies and gentlemen, economic security is a complex and multifaceted concept. It is a dynamic concept which is continuously influenced by the changing global environment. I see economic security as a system based on several pillars. There are several pillars on which that economic security stands on. However, I will talk of some of them. I would like to start with industrial security, industrial base as an element of security. To me, it is the core. A nation of our size cannot just depend on importing goods and just being a trader. But we have to, a nation of 200 and odd people, 200 odd million people, we can't, we just cannot survive. And the last few years have shown to us very clearly that you can't do it. It's not possible. And trading and allowing the industrial base to erode, as we did in the last few years before this government came in, is a real, to me, a wake-up call. Security comes through job creation. Security comes through understanding technology and know-how. And if you're up at full employment, your security becomes greater. It's inherent in it. Security comes through a strong engineering base, process industry, IT base. Security comes from a vibrant and a large private sector. And here I want to talk particularly because people don't like it in this country. And I've always felt that this is something that when you look at other countries, and I'll just talk about it, it is an important element of that security. And that is very, very large corporations. And you say to yourself, but how can that be part of the security? Ladies and gentlemen, a vibrant private sector and a very large corporate sector within that private sector is an element of security. Let's look at Korea. Look at India. Look at Malaysia. Look at Thailand. They have large corporations, and I'm talking very large. Just look at China, and this is very interesting. Not many people will probably know it. As China started to grow, as a state policy, they said, we will create large corporate sectors, so large that they will be able to become members of the Fortune 500. Fortune 500, private and public companies in China to become an element of economic security. How many have we got? None. Our largest corporation, only exports $300 million. Where is that security? Where is that reach? Where is that connectivity? We don't have it. So that's why I say even large corporations are absolutely important. So what did we do when this government came in? We put down that Make in Pakistan has to be a fundamental element. As I just said, there was de-industrialization going on, and now it's reversed, and we're going back to Make in Pakistan policy. Now, how do we do this? Several elements, and you've seen what the State Bank did, again, to increase this Make in Pakistan by the various schemes that they brought in, including TURF, which was the most popular one, rationalizing tariff structure and pursuing an import substitution policy. An import substitution policy pursued in time leads to a critical mass inside the country for that particular goods, And once you have that critical mass, then you're ready for exports. And that's how the cycle goes on. So, taking a break from the past, and I will say, taking a break from the past, by embarking and using tariff as a tool to stimulate industrial economic activity in the country, as opposed to revenue-based approach in the past. As a businessman, I have seen it over the last 40 years, how our pursuit of revenue has hampered our industrial base, has hampered our economic development, and with it comes joblessness, etc., etc. So one of the elements was, now let us switch. And I'm happy to say that to pursue this thing, the Prime Minister agreed to transfer the tariff setting from the FBR to the Ministry of Commerce. And now today, it's the Ministry of Commerce that drives it, and it drives it because it wants to increase its industrial base. Well, today, how are we doing? We're nowhere near out of the woods, but the good thing is our direction is absolutely correct. We are now moving in the right direction, though we all know that industrialization is a long-term process. Strong industrial base supported by energy security, food security, both these are a key element of economic security. Energy, food, and agriculture are vital to our economic security. All three of these are absolutely linked together in the context of our geopolitical location. Another interesting thing, again, we are weak on this, and hence our economic security is poor. Most countries build their economic security by trading with their neighbors. Pakistan is one of the weaker countries. Whereas Europeans trade up to 80–90% with their neighbors, we trade 5–7% with our neighbors. And so this recent change that the Prime Minister has agreed, we are reaching out to Afghanistan, we're reaching out to Iran, we're reaching out to Uzbekistan, through Uzbekistan to the Central Asian republics. From the Central Asian republics, we move into go west into the Russian Federation, and another approach to Europe. Unless we say to ourselves that we have to look upon Afghanistan as a strategic partner in trade, rather than a strategic depth in our other securities. Our security with Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, and beyond will come through trade and more trade and more trade. Inshallah, a day will come that we will be able to do this with India. Ladies and gentlemen, this leads to another pillar in our economic security, and that is connectivity. We want to go out, we want to trade, we want to reach out to the world. How are we doing on our connectivity? Connectivity by air, by sea, rail, road, and in today's world, by internet. Pakistan How strong are we when we look at our air linkage, our air connectivity? We know that what the situation is in PIA. Another very weak security that it really bothers me is that Pakistan has only 11 ships of its own which has the Pakistan flag on it. Bangladesh has 250. They were behind us. They have 250 of their own ships plying the oceans. We have 11. Where is our security? Something goes wrong, can we move our goods? We can't. So these are the areas. And another element of security which never comes up in our discussions, and I've been talking to the Prime Minister on this, there are certain elements in our economic thinking where we must always have surplus capacity. Because if we don't have surplus capacity, we will lose a part of our economic security. And if we have surplus capacity as a planned thing, it means we're buying our insurance. What are those? Port capacity. Pakistan can never get itself in a situation where we don't have adequate port capacity. We have it right now. Will we have it 5 years from now? Will we have it 10 years from now? We don't know. But we have to put it in our strategic planning. Internet and bandwidth. In this day and age, if we lose out on that, where are we going to be? All connectivity is through the internet. Surplus electricity and gas. We know what we went through several years ago when there was not enough electricity to run our industry, to have in our homes. Today we have surplus electricity, alhamdulillah, but it's got to be an element of state security, our own economic security, that we must always have surplus electricity. Same thing goes for gas. Another key element in that security and having surpluses, do we have adequate food reserves supported by a strong agriculture? We know what we've gone through in the last 8-9 months, desperately having to import wheat. Suppose the world refused to give us wheat. Where is our economic security? And suppose we had to buy wheat at any price. Where is our economic security? These are all vital elements. The summation of all this ultimately lands on our national balance sheet. So you come to the next pillar, which is our financial security. This financial pillar rests on provisions of a stable and functioning financial system, freedom to implement independent monetary policy, exchange rate stability, internal and external debt, our foreign exchange reserves, and servicing of our international loans. This, to me, is perhaps the most glaring weakness that we have. Financial security is perhaps the most difficult situation we inherited by this government. We've had to go in our history 23 times to the IMF since independence. 23 times. Where is our security when we always have to go for a bailout? One of the things that the Prime Minister has said to us very clearly, that let us work hard, to make sure that this time, when we're in the IMF and when we come out, it should be the last time we go to the IMF. Going to the IMF is a classical example of erosion of national sovereignty due to economic insecurity. The government has set an objective, as I've just said, that we will do this. And then, with all these elements, the next one that connects it all to the world is our economic diplomacy. The objective of our foreign policy has to be to create and further our economic security. Our foreign policy has to be such to enhance the economic security and has been enunciated by the foreign minister, where he has said economic security is absolutely necessary, but we all know it is a long-term game, and an economic diplomacy takes time to crystallize. Ladies and gentlemen, in the end, I would like to say that Pakistan has been endowed with a strategic location, and it is a situation and at a meeting point of the Middle East, South Asia, Central Asia. But during the course of our history, we have mostly suffered because of our strategic location. Time has now come to take advantage of our location instead of suffering because of it, but we use it as an advantage to us through our foreign policy. Our geostrategic location has to be complemented with geoeconomics. I would also like to propose that this forum should come up with its recommendation to further enhance the economic security of Pakistan. In particular, I would request that we come up with an economic security index along with a forecasting model, as we can have some basis on which we can have a debate through the various think tanks, is how are we doing on that security index. I would like to just now say that I've raised a lot of issues, but I'm not at all despondent. To me, this is just an economic process. We are still a very young country. We are still in the process of development. We must always be optimistic, as economic development is a long-term process. To conclude, I would like to just say that hope is the bedrock of this nation. The belief that our destiny will not be written for us, but written by us, for all the men and women who are not content to settle for the world as it is, and who have the courage to make the world as it should be. In the end, I would like to thank you all, to the organizers for inviting me, and for all of you to patiently hear me. Thank you very much.
Honorable Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Minister has very succinctly outlined the challenges. He's described the deficiencies which impinge on our national security, and he's also highlighted what the government is trying to do to rectify the situation, and he's also set an agenda for us to develop further, to create recommendations for creating a security index, economic security index. So it was a complete message, and we hope that we would be able to work on this. And now we move on to the remainder part of our session. I would like to call upon Dr. Usman Chauhan, who is the moderator of today's session, to introduce the other speakers and carry on the proceedings from there on.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Air Chief Marshal Kaleem Saadat Saab, President Cass, Honorable His Excellency Razak Daud, you have set a great tone for what is a complex question, economic security. Because the tone has been set so rigorously, my remarks before introducing our distinguished speaker, Dr. Shamshad Akhtar Saiba, are succinct. What I want to convey now is that our government has set at the core of its overall security strategy very much the idea that economics is important. Anybody you ask will tell you that economics is important, and our thinking is being shaped around those lines now, thankfully. But economic security is a nebulous concept. Try to look up the literature on it, academic literature, and you won't find as much concrete stuff as you might imagine. For that reason, my ambition for the remainder of this panel is that we get nuances teased out. And those nuances regard some of the interplays of economics and energy, economics and globalization, economics and climate change, economics and diplomacy, and the list could go much, much further. But this is a good first step, and we should probably save something for the sequel to the first Islamabad dialogue, save something for next year as well. And so now I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Shamshad Akhtar Saiba, who was a person of immense prominence. She was our caretaker finance minister at one point. She was, more importantly, former governor of the State Bank of Pakistan, and she has held very important advisory posts at the United Nations and worked closely with the World Bank as well. And my request to our distinguished speaker is to help set priorities in economic security that are premised on her rich experience in observing Pakistan and even guiding much of the economic policy in her various capacities. So we draw upon her guidance in prioritizing economic security going forward. After that, I would like to reach out and introduce the other speakers as well. But for now, I defer to Madam Shamshad Saiba.
Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and Assalamu alaikum to everybody. Air Marshal Saab, advisor to the Prime Ministers, both of them, Razak Daud Saab and Mohit Yusuf Saab. Thank you for inviting me, Mohit. Thank you for moderating this session. Economic security is undoubtedly critically linked to national security. Both are mutually reinforcing. However, disruption in one drags the other down, and vice versa. Hence, there is need for a holistic and granular understanding of the economic vulnerabilities, their intricate nexus, relationships, and risks for national security. A proper diagnostics of security risk requires surveillance of the global, regional, and domestic challenges, be it Pakistan or any other country. It also requires an assessment of opportunities for global alliances while tapping regional economic cooperation and integration potential. If one sub-region doesn't want to partner, we move to another alliance. That has some substance, of course. Robust and result-oriented partnerships thrive on trust and confidence, and for these to be successful, they need to be anchored on institutionalization of peace and security. And as a student of EU, the Union, and ASEAN particularly, I must tell you that they were all initially anchored on peace and security, where there is an intergovernmental process underlying it. Now, there may be skirmishes here and there, but bottom line is to get peace and security right. Economic security lays the precondition for integration. Cross-border infrastructure connectivity and financial security are critical to promote trade and investment. Develop regional and global public goods so that you can give comfort to outsiders, and navigate through shocks and shared vulnerabilities with support of long-term adaptation and mitigation strategy. National security allows countries to be respectful, global and regional citizens to attract economic and business relationships. And I don't care what international institutions say. I, as a citizen of Pakistan, want to be proud when I go with the international fora and say, well, I have achieved this compliance with the international standards. In contextualizing debates, there is need to recognize very briefly the international cooperation architecture, which I do believe has not served us very well as Pakistan, except for giving us more and more burden of debt, as I see, because we never fulfill the conditionalities or the policy frameworks that they ask us to structurally reform. So first, a word on this architecture. Globalization and multilateralism foster economic and trade growth and development gains undoubtedly. However, confidence in it has eroded as world moves from economic and financial crisis to pandemic and now sovereign debt surge with climate crisis unfolding as we speak. Unprecedented economic contraction from 2020 has resulted in loss of output, reverse progress achieved in reducing poverty, and resulted in job losses and growing inequalities. This is a very big shock. Second, global governance mechanism has delivered some results to the world, but it is fractured and dysfunctional given the US-China tariff, currency, intellectual property rights, and other disputes, inability of UN Security Council to resolve long-standing political dispute, or pushing for MDBs to give voice to developing and emerging markets in sync with the demands of multipolar world. Security Council itself does not give effective representation to multipolarity. Third, as global uncertainties and divergence in recovery across the advanced and developing countries happens, the disparities and inequalities across and within countries will widen and breed economic insecurity, not only in our country, but in our neighborhood also, who knows. My fourth point is that the exogenous shocks are a reality, and regional destabilizing rifts will also remain a reality. So strengthening economic security has to be within our own geographical jurisdictions. It will have to be a prerequisite for feeding national security and national security feeding our economic security. So what ought to be the new drivers of growth and trade? They of course call for global community, not just our sub-region, but we want global community to encourage peace in South Asia region. They are behind ASEAN, I can tell you, because I have worked within the ASEAN tracks. With South Asia, intra-regional trade is barely 6%, and I know you all know this. There is, however, need to tap intra-regional trade opportunities in this region, which are anywhere from 80 to 200 billion, as per the UNS cap that I was leading at one point. And we need to, of course, if we can't resolve the politics, we can move towards the other partners. We have to work to reduce our trade costs. I know collectively the trade cost of our sub-region has to be reduced by 40% to bring it at par with ASEAN. And I think it will be a long way to have intra-regional trade of the level of ASEAN. So, of course, there's a lot of potential within SAARC. We undertook studies of SAARC power grid and market for electricity, cooperation in energy, resource exploration and trade. We developed intergovernmental platforms to develop an IT information superhighway system, promoted water security and food security. And of course, all this was with the desired intention to help the welfare gains for the public. Now, having experienced what I experienced in the South Asian tracks within the United Nations, my advice for Pakistan is to not only move on to the other friendlier components of the South Asia, but also go to ASEAN. India has fostered its relationship with ASEAN. And I was very much honored that the Indians invited me to speak on their India-ASEAN partnership. United States, China, Korea, New Zealand, Australia, all of them are behind the ASEAN. So why can't we try to penetrate in the more friendlier market of ASEAN and develop intra-regional trade there? My fifth point is that sustainability has to be at the core of economic security and leveraged through regional cooperation, as several sustainable development goals are transboundary in nature. Cross-border challenges such as climate change, water, food security, disaster risk reduction, ecosystem, natural resource management, sustainable energy are all complex endeavors, undoubtedly. But collective management of shared vulnerabilities and risk is the way forward as we are hit right and left by climate and disasters which respect no boundaries. At the same time, food, water, energy security cooperation could ease supply constraints and nurture efficiency. My last point, the sixth point, is that despite endorsement by Parliament, implementation of sustainable development goals, which is supposed to yield us a superior economic model, has unfortunately been very slow and uneven, relegated only to the Planning Commission, while it should be driven by diplomatic as well as the sectoral tracks at the highest leadership. Most worrisome to me are the climate change impact on food, energy, water security, and lack of effective management of nexus between these three. We call basically that SDG integration analytics, which is now being propagated across the world. Pakistan, unfortunately, is ranked 5th in the list of most vulnerable countries, with the greenhouse gas emissions expected to rise by 300% by 2030. It's a time when we should be getting rid of it. And implementing nationally defined contribution will require us $40 billion. Countries' air quality is second worst in the world. Temperature increases will be above global temperatures, and there is onset already of glaciers melting. Floods, as you all know, are recurring phenomena. Moody's has placed Pakistan in the most susceptible category to physical climate change, negatively affecting our sovereign credit risk and increasing the risk premium demanded by investors and creditors. So to mitigate the risk of the climate-related disasters, which will come close to none, is to ensure food security for our fast-growing population. The government's agriculture transformation plan, which I just got from some colleague, is a welcome step. Investment in resilient agriculture, water management practices, effective management of groundwater is critical. energy transition has yet to unfold in Pakistan. We are going towards coal when the world is going towards cleaner sources. Well, I know we had no other choice. It is well recognized that increasing solar and wind capacity from 1,500 megawatt that we have today to 4,000 megawatt will raise its share to at least 30% of the total installed capacity by 2030. It would represent a least cost expansion scenario. It will give industrial competitiveness because renewable energy is cheaper. It will enhance our security and reduce GH emissions. Renewable energy policy has been there for 2 years. No increase in renewable share within this country except for drips and drabs. So let me conclude. A well-sequenced action plan to lift Pakistan's economic security, which would reinforce national security, calls for political solidarity, which would reinforce, of course, national security, but we do need political solidarity. We do need private sector involvement and community action. And Razak Daud Sahab is right. We have a very rich corporate sector, but we need this corporate sector to work without subsidies, without rent seeking, without getting any undue favors. Least of all, to be seeking basically what has been just talked about, tax holidays and tax incentives. No country has progressed with tax concessions and tax holidays. I can tell you from my 40 years of international experience, you end up wasting a lot of resources and you develop industries which can't withstand the international competitiveness or international competition. Pakistan, however, to me, the most worrisome faces macroeconomic insecurity and vulnerabilities that are compounded by the investment saving gap, which have been yawning. Fiscal deficits, we were told, would come down, but they have again reached record levels, requiring high recourse to borrowings. Current account compression in the wake of COVID is driven by curbing import demand. It will hurt industrial revival and industrial diversification. Rise in foreign exchange reserves, unfortunately, are primarily debt and FX deposits, sourced rather than earned through export earnings. So where is the economic security? We have to really strive harder for that. Unless growth regains strong momentum, low domestic resource mobilization, and low non-debt creating FX flows will raise debt sustainability risks. The biggest security risk today, to me, is unsustainable debt. Under the baseline and downside macroeconomic scenario, public debt will peak to 98.4% of GDP and 107% of GDP in fiscal year 21, respectively, breaching substantially the federal debt legal limits of 60%. Combination of exchange rate depreciation, weak macroeconomic fundamentals, repayment of market borrowings, and transfer of power holding private limited debt, which we have now acknowledged to be a general government debt, has all contributed to the unsustainability of the debt. But getting the arithmetics right was right, as Razak Daud said, getting the figures and getting the analysis right is critical. So debt risks have mounted at a time when Pakistan has benefited from the G20 debt relief, which in the first round is close to 1.8 billion, and it will benefit for another year or so because G20 is working towards giving an extension of the debt suspension service initiative that I also am behind the scenes working with the G20 think tank group. So a state's risk vectors have to be shaped by the structure of the economy. Unfortunately, we have state domination in the industrial sector. The quality of our political and governance would be improved so that we could entertain the idea of having more integration, if not at a regional level, at the global level, because after all, we are a very open economy. But for all this, we need to improve the state of our finances. And we have to recognize that unless and until we diversify our sources from the banking to non-bank and capital markets and long-term institutional investors, including insurance industry, we are never going to have the depth and diversification so critical for growth and competitiveness of a country. Thank you so much, Mohit Saab, for inviting me.
Thank you, Dr. Saba. After hearing the remarks of His Excellency Razak Daud Sahab and Dr. Shamshad Akhtar Sahiba, you may start to feel a little bit overwhelmed, even though they express optimism, because there are so many dimensions to discuss in the Pakistan context specifically. And so what I would like now is for us all to take a step back with a bit of higher order thinking. For that, I wish to invite Professor Miles Kaler, Distinguished Professor, School of International Service at American University and Senior Fellow for Global Governance at the Council on Foreign Relations. His talk is going to be about economic security and globalization, which I think puts us and our condition in terms of economic security in a wider international context, which is transforming beneath our feet. Please, I yield to you, Professor.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be included in this very distinguished panel in a conference that is considering security in its broadest context. And I've been asked to address in a very brief set of remarks two controversial and contested concepts, globalization and economic security. Controversy surrounds these concepts because some regard them as simple opposites. Globalization, which has involved the opening of national economies to cross-border flows of all kinds, necessarily reduces economic security in this view. And during a global pandemic, one with severe economic consequences for both industrialized and emerging economies, it is easy to accept this position. Perhaps, however, this argument continues. The argument has been ended by the pandemic itself, since some have predicted that it has damaged economic globalization beyond repair. I would argue against both the proposition that globalization is winding down and that globalization is inherently damaging to national economic security. Let me address the first point. Even before the pandemic, globalization had become what The Economist magazine termed slowbalization. Following the global financial crisis, financial flows did not return to their previous peak, and global trade appeared to reach a plateau. As the Harvard economist Paul Antras has pointed out, however, on other dimensions, globalization continued to progress. For example, pre-pandemic, the share of migrants in the world population reached its highest level since 1990. I would point to two other features of globalization over the past 20 years that are particularly significant for economic security, and I would argue they will persist. The explosion of cross-border digital flows and the digital transformation of growing sectors of the economy, and the central importance of global value chains in the world economy and in world trade. Rather than creating new vulnerabilities for national economies, I would argue that these two features of globalization revealed pre-existing vulnerabilities and may contribute to enhanced economic security in the long run if they are properly managed. So what are the sources of economic insecurity in a globalized world? I mean, we will have many points of view on this panel about that, but I would point to three very briefly. First, and this is the conventional view, the actions of malign actors, what might be termed the classic concerns of economic security. Vulnerabilities that can be manipulated or exploited by other actors, whether states or non-state actors. Certainly, digital flows reveal new vulnerabilities. to name only one, the threat posed to financial systems undergoing rapid digital transformation that has been accelerated during the pandemic. At the same time, the sector has experienced the second largest share of COVID-19 related cyber attacks from criminal networks as well as states. So after the health sector itself, it is the financial sector that has suffered the most from these cyber attacks during the pandemic. There's also the issue of illicit financial flows related to an array of crimes, which remains a persistent problem for both global North and South, and in certain respects has been enabled by the growth of digital flows cross-border. Intricate global value chains have also become a source of concern as national rivalries intensify. The economic clash between China and the United States has been driven in part by an effort to decouple its global value chains in areas of military utility and technological importance. But this conventional concern over the threat from malign actors exploiting vulnerabilities does not capture other challenges to economic security in a globalized world, some of which have been mentioned by the preceding very distinguished speaker. The second source is the policies of major economies that can create unintended negative consequences for others. We can see, looking ahead, the fiscal stimulus recently passed in the United States is likely to create US interest rate increases, which will increase the debt burden of developing countries. The US didn't intend that, but that may well be the consequence. In similar fashion, the effects of the US-China trade war have been positive for some developing countries, but damaging for others. And third and finally, there are shocks of many kinds, whether originating in policies or natural disasters, that can now ripple very rapidly through the global economy because of its interconnectedness. The pandemic, of course, is a prime example. But earlier we had the 2011 Fukushima earthquake and tsunami. We have a current supply shock from the shortage of chips, which was unexpected because of the revival in world trade and has caused great distress in the United States automobile industry. And of course, in the longer run, and something that will be addressed by other speakers, climate change. So these shocks are a third and very important source of insecurity. What can be done? Conventional strategies become more costly in a globalized world and less effective as well. I think for solutions, we should look to societies that have managed these challenges to economic security successfully. And the overriding lesson, it seems to me, is that globalization is not the problem. It is the capabilities and institutions of societies that permit the beneficial economic effects of globalization to outweigh those that threaten economic security and economic well-being. Each strategy, national strategy to enhance economic security, carries its own risks or drawbacks. First, prevention, which is often regarded as or read as protection. So in certain cases, limited delinking or greater regulation of cross-border flows may be wise. We've now adopted a very pragmatic attitude toward capital controls, for example. But caution is also required. So far, US measures to decouple from China have not produced a reshoring of industry to the United States, and it has damaged US manufacturing employment and agricultural exports. Protection in the interest of security can easily become protectionism in the hands of powerful economic interests. Second, monitoring and filtering flows. In the case of illicit financial flows, separating good from bad flows and other negative flows as well. And here, new technologies, provided in many ways by globalization, such as using big data and machine learning, may help filtering the bad from the good. The risks are the economic cost to financial institutions and also the threats to individual privacy and control of information through this process. A third strategy is preparation and planning for possible shocks, which requires adequate intelligence and planning, but those plans will only be of value when the next shock arrives if they are implemented, and typically implemented with coherence and speed, which has not been in evidence, of course, with many of the plans for pandemics that were on the shelf in many of the industrialized countries, including my own, before the pandemic. Fourth, diversification. This is a familiar one, and this is a very helpful one because globalization actually encourages diversification. The risks in global value chains have been countered by many companies already with this strategy, and governments can clearly encourage such moves. The difficulty is that global value chains are very intricate and they're not transparent, and obtaining the necessary information about them, which is often proprietary in the hands of corporations, can be very difficult. Another familiar strategy is insurance, and that was mentioned by some of the previous speakers. It's also popular, but it can be very costly. You can build up stockpiles for certain goods. You can build up reserves at the central bank, which is also costly. But also, and often overlooked, you require social insurance for individuals and families in the society as well against shocks of various kinds. And you can learn from past experience and adapt institutions accordingly, creating nimble and innovative national institutions. And here I would point to the example of Taiwan, arguably the most successful economy and country in dealing with the pandemic, because of the lessons it learned from earlier experience, particularly the SARS pandemic in 2003. It created a dedicated public health agency that managed the prevention and control of pandemics, and gave it the authority to coordinate other agencies of the national government. This was an innovation that really very few other governments deployed after the SARS pandemic, and it served Taiwan very well. All of these steps can be summarized by a term that was used by the previous distinguished speaker and has become popular during the pandemic, which is resilience. Applied to global value chains typically, but it could be applied to societies as a whole. Recognize the likelihood of disruptions and build in ways to deal with and minimize the effects of such disruptions and shocks. Economic resilience is finally built on trust between populations and their governments. Final and most important point, all of these national strategies to increase economic security are strengthened by regional and global cooperation. Indeed, in many cases, they will not succeed without such cooperation. At a minimum, such cooperation serves to discourage unilateral measures that produce outcomes that are much poorer at the national and the global level. And here I would point to a recent study by the Rand Corporation, which documents the cost to the industrialized world from vaccine nationalism. In other words, if the entire world is not vaccinated, there will be serious effects on the growth prospects of the North. So that demonstrates the interconnectedness and the requirement of global cooperation, even for purely national economic interest and security. So in conclusion, I would say we can assume that globalization may change, but it will not and has not gone into reverse. And given the many shocks that the global economy has experienced in the 2 decades of this century, sharing its benefits, as well as countering its negative effects, will continue to present major but not insurmountable challenges to national governments that aim at the security of their societies. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I think one important takeaway from your enlightening talk is that what we see in our local context in terms of the challenges to economic security are also echoed around the world in a wider context. I think that's important for us to remember. And while Professor Miles Kaler covered globalization and transformation, I will invite in juxtaposition our following speaker, Professor Joe Aldi, who is a professor for practice of public policy at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, as well as a university fellow at Resources for the Future, as well as a fellow at the National Bureau of Economic Research. And in addition, I should add that he not only had a great academic pedigree, but also a practitioner impact and a policy impact because he was closely assisting the Obama administration with its environmental policy. And what I would request from Professor Aldi is to share with us concepts of sustainability and partnership, particularly in energy and environment, where he has had a large academic and practitioner impact, the juxtaposition being transformation as globalization, and then sustainability through transformations. I yield to you, Professor Joe Aldi.
Thank you, Dr. Johan. And thank you to the Center for Aerospace and Security Studies for the opportunity to participate in the Islamabad Security Dialogue. It's a pleasure to be with you, at least virtually. I wish we could be together in person, and I hope each of you are staying healthy as we confront and better manage the COVID-19 pandemic. I think this is a very important conversation about economic security. It is critical for us to think about the foundations for robust and widely shared economic growth, as well as the risks that may undermine economic growth, and the role of public policy in strengthening that foundation, and, to echo a term used by several of my colleagues already on this panel, for enhancing our resilience to these risks. In this context, I would like to focus my remarks today on energy and climate change and their role in economic security in Pakistan and across the world. Long-term economic growth requires improvements in productivity. Technological innovation has produced new tools and equipment, most of which relies on an energy source in order to make the labor of workers more efficient. Consider one of the most basic tasks we face, feeding ourselves, our families, and our communities. Over thousands of years, we have developed new tools to enhance the productivity of farming, to harness the power of livestock to increase farm productivity, and then to harness the power of tractors and other farm machinery to further increase the output for each farmer toiling on the land. As someone who grew up on a small farm and had chores as a child, I can assure you how grateful I was for that long history of innovation. But that kind of transition, new equipment, new technology, new ideas in concert with energy, has made labor more productive across many industries around the world. Whether it's making steel or cars or smartphones, we've seen how economies have grown as we use new ideas, energy, and people in more creative and productive ways. A reliable source of energy may not be sufficient for economic growth. We also need education and training. We need innovation in the production of new knowledge, and we need market conditions for entrepreneurship. These are all quite important, but energy is necessary for sustaining economic growth. A reliable source of energy can attract investment in new factories and service facilities, and a reliable source of energy can make it easier for our children to study and learn, and become even more productive workers when they are adults. Ensuring reliable power is easier said than done. As evident in many countries around the world, sometimes we can't keep the lights on. Even in the state of Texas, here in the United States, just last month, we had a massive disruption of the generation and transmission of electricity. Pakistan has known challenges, such as the energy crisis over the past decade, the difficulty of providing access to electricity throughout the country, and the challenge of reliably delivering power. Overcoming these challenges will create the foundation for economic growth, and in so doing, improving the welfare of the people today and their children and grandchildren. When we look back, for example, in the year 2013, the Asian Development Bank estimated that the power shortages in Pakistan cost about 2 to 3% of gross domestic product that year. And it's not just that we lost economic output that year, it's that we're undermining the drivers of growth in economic output over time. And it's that these effects that persist beyond the current shock to the energy system that can slow economic growth. Addressing energy poverty and energy reliability challenges through the growing use of coal-fired power, however, does pose serious trade-offs, as Dr. Shamshad Akhtar noted in her comments earlier in our session. Our economic growth and our social welfare also depend on the environmental impacts of the way we produce and consume energy. While energy can enable workers to be more productive through the use of equipment and tools, the local air pollution associated with the burning of coal and petroleum products can adversely affect our public health. This pollution causes asthma and chronic bronchitis, and even premature death. It can reduce agricultural output on our farms. And there's evidence in developed and developing countries alike that exposure to air pollution increases missed work days due to illness and lowers worker productivity. Even in the United States, where air pollution is lower than in many developing countries, a 10% reduction in air pollution can increase the productivity of workers in some occupations by 1 to 2%. The use of fossil fuels around the world for several centuries has provided the foundation for our modern economies, but also precipitated the climate crisis. The concentrations of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere have achieved unprecedented levels in the history of our species. The emissions of carbon dioxide continue to rise, even if last year, due to COVID-19, we'll see a modest decline in emissions. And our emissions annually right now are about 60% greater than they were in 1992, when the world first reached an agreement to combat climate change at the Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit. The climate has warmed and will continue to warm, with average temperatures more than 1 degree C higher than the pre-industrial levels. Given the nature of the climate system, some of what we have already emitted will continue to increase the temperature of the planet around us. And when we look at all the existing capital stock, the power plants, the factories, the cars and trains and airplanes around the world, if we just use those to the end of their economic lifetimes, we're likely going to go beyond 1.5 degrees C of warming and raise the prospect of reaching and exceeding 2 degrees C. Scientists have warned us about the adverse impacts associated with going beyond these temperature thresholds, and in fact, it has mobilized some of the multilateral efforts to combat climate change, such as in the 2015 Paris Agreement, where the world agreed to limit warming well below 2 degrees C, but our actions to date are not quite up to that standard set by the negotiators and leaders in that Paris conference. When we think about the economic damages of carbon dioxide, right now it's estimated that the emissions that occur this year will impose $1 to $2 trillion worth of cost. That's the present value of all the economic damages spread over many years and across the world. But it's important to recognize we are realizing the adverse consequences of climate change today. Consider a few categories of damages. Flooding is a serious problem in the United States. It's a serious problem in Pakistan. The economic damages of flooding in Pakistan in the past decade are measured in the billions of dollars each year, with incredible disruption when we think about the destroyed homes and the farmland for the people living along major rivers. We think about the adverse impacts of heat waves, whether it's people who died in heat waves we've suffered in Chicago, heat waves that have occurred in Europe, or say the 2015 heat wave that struck Karachi. We have the adverse consequences on agricultural output, where both water stress and temperature stress can reduce our productivity of our farmlands. We think about the public health risk of greater spread of vector-borne diseases with a changing climate. They can also lower worker productivity. And we think about, in general, whether we're seeing this now from lab studies or existing recent empirical observational studies of the labor market, workers are less productive in hotter environments. And as we have to spend more and more to adapt to a changing climate and to clean up the mess after the natural disasters that result from climate change, there are then fewer resources that we can dedicate to improving education, enhancing public health, building the infrastructure that also helps enable greater productivity and long-term economic growth. Indeed, recent macroeconomic research shows that warmer than typical temperatures can slow economic growth in developing countries. A 1 degree C warmer year causes a 1.3 percentage point decline in the growth rate in the year of that warmer temperature for developing countries. This effect actually isn't seen statistically in developed countries. Climate change is disproportionately harming developing countries and their economies, in part because of the disproportionate share of economic activity that is in more climate-exposed industries in developing countries, but also because there are fewer resources to adapt to those threats posed by climate change. And because this is affecting the growth rate, these are effects that are going to persist over time and slow the growth in the economy and exacerbate inequality among developed and developing countries over time. Now, this is recognized by Pakistan and its nationally determined contribution under the 2015 Paris Agreement. In that UN climate agreement, virtually every country in the world came forward to say, here is going to be our contribution to the global effort to combat climate change. Pakistan recognized its vulnerability to a changing climate, what we've already heard some in this session, noting that the threats that climate change poses to both lives and livelihoods, as well as what it can do to reduce emissions if there's cooperation with other countries. I think it's critical to realize how addressing energy poverty and increasing energy access and ensuring the full use of electricity is going to be important when we think about how we may adapt to a changing climate. Since air conditioning is something that is going to become more and more common in Pakistan and throughout the developing world, and is going to be critical as a way to offset warmer temperatures. Indeed, the energy challenge and the climate challenge are deeply interlinked in a two-way street. The way we have produced energy historically contributes to climate change, and climate change will place new demands and stresses on our energy system. Each of these are going to then pose threats to long-term economic growth. Now, we need energy to enable economic growth, but we also need to manage the risks posed by energy to the local environment and the global climate. These risks counter the benefits of energy for economic growth. And I think that's why we are seeing the global community really starting to ramp up its efforts to combat climate change. We've seen it, the EU and Japan last year say they're going to eliminate on net their emissions by the year 2050. We've seen China step up and say they will do that by 2060. And just recently, President Biden here in the United States has also pledged to eliminate emissions on net by the year 2050. We're going to need, in order to achieve and deliver on these goals, we're going to need better policies on energy and climate within and across countries. Policy frameworks that can attract investment capital to meet energy needs and address the climate crisis. Investors and inventors are ready. They need the policy predictability to really start the transformation of our energy system. Most powerful can be how we use the price of energy, and to augment it with ways of pricing the pollution associated with energy, such as carbon dioxide emissions, and ways that can send clear signals to the private sector on how to deploy existing zero carbon energy, such as solar and nuclear power, and how to invest in innovation in the next generation of clean energy technologies. We need economic coordination across countries to ensure that energy access, as well as to ensure that people are not choking on the air or facing the growing threats from a changing climate. Our national policies can have important international spillovers, and not just the negative pollution impacts, but also positive economic effects. We found in some of our research that the subsidies for solar power, first in Germany and then in the United States, actually helped drive down the cost of manufacturing solar panels, which makes it cheaper for everybody. people in Germany, people in the United States, people around the world now to invest in solar power because it is now competitive with conventional sources.
May I just interrupt? We still have one speaker to go and we are nearing the end of our time.
Yes, my apologies. Let me wrap up. I do want to close by noting the importance of how we move forward multilaterally. We're going to see that this year with Glasgow, the Conference of the Parties in November. But we're going to see this in many other economic and political fora, whether it's the UN General Assembly, the G20, coordination of central banks around the world. I think when we hear former central bank governors talking about climate change, as we've had already in this session, it's clear that this is an economic issue as well as an environmental one. And in managing these risks, we can promote a more secure economic environment and enable robust long-term economic growth to the benefit of all people. Let me conclude the remarks now. Thank you again for the opportunity to participate in this discussion.
Thank you, Professor Aldi. There's a key takeaway from, among many others, in your talk, which is that economic security involves co-creation of value and working together. Climate and energy and all of these issues are shared problems, and I think we're all beneficiaries as countries if we work together to have a wider net of security. I'm pleased to announce that I have received permission, and I'll insinuate that it's because of popular demand, that we're extending this session by 15 minutes so that we have one more delightful speaker and an adequate amount of discussion and Q&A after. So with that note, I thank you, Professor Aldi, and now I turn to Harun Sharif Saab, who will be our speaker who has an extra burden, because now that we have covered global issues of economic security and local issues of economic security and the synthesis between them, how do we move forward in the world in terms of taking economic diplomacy? Harun Sharif Saab is a visiting fellow at the Institute of Development Studies at the University of Sussex. He is a former Minister of State of Investment for the government of Pakistan, and he has been a member of the Prime Minister's Task Force on Economic Diplomacy, which I've been a part of as well. And sir, for this economic diplomacy challenge we face, given all of these issues locally and globally, I defer to your guidance, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chauhan. Air Marshal Kaleem Saadat, President Kass, Dr. Moeed Yusuf, distinguished panelists. I think much has been said. I would like to try and capture the context in which countries, particularly Pakistan, have to set up the economic diplomacy approach from a geostrategic to geoeconomics, as we hear quite often from this government functionaries. So we are living in a world where now multiple economic power centers are emerging, mostly led by China and in Asia. And that is something Pakistan has to see very carefully. It's called the Asian century, and the challenge for Pakistan would be to tailor our economic diplomacy in a manner that we catch up with the levels of East Asia or ASEAN. We have been left behind, far, far left behind for multiple reasons. We do see US-India Cold War, US-India partnership and Cold War on China to continue in the medium term, despite China's, resistance to stay out of it. But as it was mentioned, that somehow it has led to the forces of protectionism and forces of crony capitalism as well at times. Regional connectivity can play an important role, but regional connectivity is not only about connecting through roads and or travel only. It has to be knowledge oriented. We need to understand economies around us much, much better. Pakistan needs to invest. We have not even invested enough understanding China well. So this is something we need to very carefully think about. What I see in this region, which is South Asia, frankly, by now we should write the obituary of SAARC. But what's happening in South Asia is that I see two blocks emerging. One is India and the East, which is Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh. And second, Pakistan is very well positioned on West and Central Asia and Western China. Now, these markets in the near future are likely to be connected, likely to be interactive, and that is where the dialogue will move around sub-regional themes, not necessarily the traditional South Asian theme. Two more contextual points. So now, the point was raised that, Pakistan needs to strengthen the industrial base. I think it's an important point. But as we move towards the fourth industrial revolution, Pakistan needs to very carefully see that what kind of competitive industry Pakistan needs to have in order to go forward towards sustainable growth. If we continue putting, in the leaky bucket, which we say, which has been drained to our, resources through patronage and subsidies, then perhaps that industrial base might not be something one should look for. Digital transformation and future of jobs. For a country with a young population, we need to see that industry will not create jobs and the advantage of cheap labor will disappear in the coming years. And that is where perhaps serious thinking on efficiency-based skills to knowledge-based skills transformation would be needed. Now, with this backdrop, what's happening, around us, I actually, I'm very, very pleased, and it's been acknowledged, the Prime Minister's commitment towards enhancing economic diplomacy, regional connectivity. This is what he said in the morning as well. The key issue is that how to manage that transformation. There is an institutional angle. There is an angle of, picking winners. So let me try and do a few points on that dimension, that how Pakistan can actually demonstrate to the world or signal to the world that yes, we can do it. The investors in private sector are key, but they look for tangible commercial transactions and capability to structure it. And opening space is only a very tiny little, step to do that. Countries have grown rather rapidly. So, this whole school of notion that economic development is a very long process, it's partly holds, but look at Indonesia, Chile, Cambodia, Vietnam, the growth has come in, in the span of 20 to 25 years. So we need to learn from these, the people who have really grown in our lifetimes. And Pakistan can do it if we put our house in order. Now, as I've mentioned, that no country in the world has achieved geostrategic to geoeconomic transformation without breaking the mindset which says that we can't do it. We need to look at it that, patronage-based industry hasn't really helped Pakistan at all. And the massive borrowing which we are getting into without building innovative financing and saving instrument in the financial market will continue to push us. Now, Pakistan's growth projections are 1.5% to 2% for next 2 years. Now, that is no way enough for a population of 2 million young people coming into the labor market every year. Now, we have very bright opportunities. I'm not at all pessimistic here. I'm just giving you the challenges which we need to get out of denial and actually face it and do it. And countries have done it. Now, what we need to look at is that if we need sustainable growth, we need to look at it very carefully, our comparative advantage, which is not based on state patronage. Now, for instance, Pakistan could be a hub of food security, not for only our own country, but also for the smaller countries in the region in the Middle East and Western China. But for that, we need to make massive investments in research, in economic zones, in value addition. Why companies, large corporates, we all need. But large corporates will only come to this country or be formed if they have the comfort level that any dispute resolution, any other issue will be resolved within the law of the land. What Dubai has done, what Qatar has done, what Kazakhstan has done, they have set up independent financial centers where dispute resolution, where flow of capital, where banking systems, everything is housed there, and nobody can touch you, or harass you in property rights and other things. Pakistan needs to bring in foreign investors here, open up the market, give them comfort zone that yes, if you come here, you're protected. At this point in time, the fragmentation and over-regulation of the state actually stops the number of corporates entering, Pakistan. So what I wanted to say was that if we can seriously look at our economic model based on our competitiveness, we have wonderful, pockets of competitiveness. Look at the city of Sialkot, which is 13% of our total exports. Now, without any subsidy, without state support unnecessarily, they have built their own infrastructure and they're working on it. So we need to learn and leverage that industry rather than basically going to the same school which has been thriving on state patronage. So that is message number 2 for that. There are 2 more quick things I would say, and then I'll stop. Pakistan, as I said, the 2 blocks emerging. Now, what are we offering as economic diplomacy to our neighbors? Now, there has to be a commercial value proposition. And one of the key things at Sussex, I'm working on China, post-COVID China. One of the key things which China has done in economic diplomacy is that they first put economic commercial transactions on table and structured the dialogue around transactions rather than opening up space and waiting for somebody else to make the transactions. Now, Pakistan at this point in time in our government system does not have the capability to come up with transactions of regional nature. We need transaction managers, we need engineers, we need financial sector experts. We don't have financing. I would make 2 propositions for that. And this proposition is actually based on some realistic dialogue. I think Pakistan should lobby and reach out to China and set up the regional office of Asian Infrastructure Bank in Pakistan. That will not only bring the resources, and it should cater Central Asia, Afghanistan, and others, but it will bring much needed capability to do transactions. And at this point in time, similarly, Asian Development Bank's regional program makes absolutely no sense being in Manila. So frankly speaking, the proximity in future, Pakistan should try in multilaterals. Let me tell you, India at the moment hosts 14 multilateral programs in Delhi, not in Washington. So Pakistan needs to look at it, that how we can offer a space that people move in. If we want to take leadership in connectivity, why can't the ECO office be moved now to Pakistan and revolved? These things are a little bit, why it's in Iran for so many years. Pakistan's prime minister is giving positive vibes. Pakistan's foreign minister has been giving vibes, but there needs to be backup by strong institutions of commercial transactions. Dr. Shamshad Akhtar has very rightly mentioned a commercial bank-based model cannot raise the level of savings and investments which we need to grow at a sustainable level. We need to deepen the financial market and bring players internationally. There's a fear of global companies entering in Pakistan, I'm afraid. And that is where we need to break the barrier and bring them in. There is capital roaming around in the region, in sovereign wealth funds, but mind you that this will not be translated into transactions unless we put together the projects which are not only viable, but also we ensure best corporate governance, that these are managed on international standards. And private sector could do it. It cannot be done in the state. And we saw when, the money was asked for friendly countries to bail us out, it was linked to an economic package as well. We struggled to structure the economic package. In 2.5 years, we could not do privatization alone. So my question is that strengthening these institutions, taking them out of the ministries which are already not efficient, and handing over to professionals will give a signal. Foreign Office, many countries in economic diplomacy, they have created a cadre of economic diplomacy. So maybe if 10 countries are priority, we should put on our best ambassadors there and create incentives for them. Still, our ambassador would like to go to Geneva's and New York's and Washington's, not there. So these are few thoughts, because the world honestly is looking for signals from Pakistan that this is a country which offers potential, but can also do transactions and ensure, property rights and dispute resolution. So these were few thoughts, and I remain optimistic and very happy that this dialogue is happening. And I congratulate the organizers for organizing it and giving me an opportunity. And sorry for the Pakistani colleagues, I perhaps took some of their dinner time.
Thank you very much, Harun Sharif Saab. That was a very good coverage of the challenge that we face and how we can move forward in terms of economic diplomacy. I want to acknowledge that the social media has been active and has sent us some questions. So I want to acknowledge it, but I don't want to pose those questions because they're very well covered. For example, 2 were about how can we move forward with economic diplomacy, which was the crux of Harun Sharif Saab's presentation. That was Zainab and Aisha. And then there was another question by Zishan about the impediments to a progressive economic regime, which I think is the crux of every speaker's presentation. So what I would like to do instead with these 10 precious minutes is to ask about the microphones and ask the audience to pose questions. So if the microphones get to them, otherwise please raise your hands as you have, and I'll ask you to articulate. I'll re-articulate into the microphone. Sir, please, in the gray jacket.
My question is simple and short. The Canadian Indian scholar T.V. Paul in his book The Warrior State, Pakistan in the Contemporary World, has proposed the thesis that Pakistan's geostrategic unique position in the world has actually become a curse rather than an advantage for Pakistan. So I believe it's totally correct that Pakistan over the years has not actually been in a position to diversify its social and economic sector. So why do you believe that this has happened? Thank you.
So the question of the gentleman was quoting the Warrior State book and the mentality of not incorporating economic security earlier, and why was it a warrior state? Your Excellency Razak Daud Saab, I would request if you wish to participate in this question, otherwise any of the speakers are free. Right, sir. So I'll request particularly Shamshad Saiba and Harun Sharif Saab, why do you think that this transformation and mindset wasn't adopted earlier, and how can it be done at a short interval, let's say? I mean to say the transition from having a traditional security mindset to an economic security mindset. How can it be achieved quickly? I think we'll rephrase it like that.
Arun, you want to have a shot at it first?
Well, I just said, look, this transition, it's a very interesting transition. And this is what I'm trying to say, that once the leadership has taken a position, and a very positive position, because that's where the word is going, let's not get into the past that why we couldn't do it. There are multiple reasons. Pakistan became a proxy state or whatever. Now, if we need to achieve this transition, that's what I'm trying to say, that we need to believe, and it has to be transactions-led. It cannot be done through talks only. So Pakistan should be able to offer, commercially viable transactions to partner countries, and selected countries. Our capacity is very limited. So we need to, rather than just reaching out to rest of the world that we are open for economic diplomacy, we need to very carefully target, and I would say ASEAN, I would say Central Asia, I would say Western China, and a few countries of Middle East, not more than 8 to 10. So a practical way forward. The moment nothing will succeed like a success.
Right, sir.
So far, our projects of international nature have really gone bad, either because of policy inconsistency or some disputes or Pakistan's, capability not to manage it well. And we need to look at it very carefully, that how we could do. And for frankly speaking, there are very easy transactions which we can make, not only with Afghanistan, but also, we can offer to the Middle East, as I said, the food security. Pakistan could be a hub of, a digital services system here in Pakistan for the neighborhood. But for that, we need to put that composition on table. The mindset that somebody else, like a donor country or an outsider, will come and make it for us needs to be stopped. It has to be done by ourselves, and private sector has the capability.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Shamshad, would you wish to add to that?
No, I think Arun has covered it. My own view is that we may think we never paid attention to economic security, but I have to tell you, in my earlier days in Pakistan, when I was at the World Bank office and was dealing with multiple sectors and multiple planning as well as other subjects, I have to say I think Pakistan did connect with economic security issues. The fact that Pakistan had early on self-sufficiency in food, Pakistan had better institutions at one time. So it's not as if we never paid attention to economic security. We did. It's just that we got lost somewhere because of the war on terrorism, the dedicated attention that could have been given to long-term economic development and economic growth was somewhere lost. And second, I think we forgot to build institutions, and we got carried away with emulating this model or that model. When we have now we have recognized that institutional building and partnership with the security institutions will reinforce our strengths. And as we can see, we are talking about economic security not on a standalone basis, but with the national security organs, is how I would take it. And over the last few years, I think there has been a conscious attempt to dovetail these. And I think hopefully with this experiment, we should be able to reinforce the nexus between economic security and national security. Now, economic security is a huge subject, and we need a lot of homework to be done, as some of us were alluding to, like trying to figure out how do you get the climate right, how do you get the energy right, how do you get the water security. And it's not as if these subjects were not studied during different periods of Pakistan. They were, but they weren't like glued as they are being glued now by this event. I hope I was able to answer that.
Absolutely. In the interest of time, I just want to make one more comment because I think it adds to the coverage of the topics we have. Economic security has so many different facets, and we understand that. Mushkilein itni ke aasan ho gayi. There's so many mushkilein, but we are all optimistic. There's also a question of macro and micro. A lot of our discussion today, based on what I had requested, was macro, but I want you to think about microeconomic security, which is, for example, that there are 40,000 road deaths nearly in Pakistan every year, and usually the people who die are the breadwinners. So the family that is affected by the road death of one person has lost its economic security. So it's not something always to think about in the abstract, but it's something very visceral. You will actually know people who have lost their economic security. And from that micro stance, we go out to macro. And with that, I think We've demanded a lot of patience from our speakers, our audience, both virtually and in person. So President Saab, Air Chief Marshal Kaleem Saadat, our keynote speaker, His Excellency Razak Daud Saab, our distinguished speakers who are in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Washington, Islamabad, and Karachi, our audience physically here and virtually, I wish to thank you, and I also wish to thank the National Security Division for having organized the first Islamabad dialogue, and it has been a wonderful experience for all of us, I'm sure. Thank you very much.
If I may ask, the speakers have done an excellent job. We are not really magnanimous with our applause, so can I ask for an applause for all our speakers? Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure with you.
Thank you, Air Chief Marshal Saadat, moderator, and the distinguished speakers for an insightful discussion. Now I would request you for a group photograph on the stage. Wear your masks. Thank you, sir. Okay, I don't think so. I think इसी तरह कर लें. Okay, this brings us to the end of the first day of the Islamabad Security Dialogue. For the second day of the Islamabad Security Dialogue, we will be joined by Chief of Army Staff General Qamar Javed Bajwa, Foreign Minister Mr. Shah Mahmood Qureshi, Ms. Hina Rabbani Khar, Mr. Ali Jahangir Siddiqui, Dr. Sania Nishtar, Dr. Faisal Sultan, Mr. Malik Amin Aslam, Ambassador Jalil Abbas Jilani, Dr. Huma Bakai, Mr. Mushahid Hussain Sayyid, Dr. Hu from China Institute of Contemporary International Relations, Ms. Laurel Merrill, and Ambassador Dr. Akbar S. Ahmed. For the second day of the Islamabad Security Dialogue, the key themes of discussion are human security, regional peace, and evolving world order. The opening session at 1 p.m. by Chief of Army Staff will be live streamed, and attendance will be through invites. Another announcement that the remaining dialogue sessions from 3 p.m. onwards will be virtual with restricted physical presence from media, NST, and advisory board think tanks. Thank you very much.